Throughout the month of June, we started to bring in some huge harvests and got started on preserving, and also have been enjoying cooking and eating the abundance coming out of the garden. If you saw my June garden tour, you'll notice that we're kind of going back in time on some of this a little bit, but I wanted to share not only how we are growing our fresh vegetables, but also how we use them.
We have snap peas and snow peas ready for harvesting today, so I'm gonna get going on that. Even though it's raining outside, it rains here a lot in the spring, so sometimes I just kind of have to work through that in order to get things done. I still have a ton of snow peas out here, but it's starting to thunder really bad, so I'm gonna run inside and start getting these ready for preserving, and then I'll come and get the rest of the peas another day.
My go-to method of food preservation for snap peas and snow peas is to blanch and freeze them. I find that sometimes the simpler methods are the most versatile later on because you just have one simple ingredient and you can use it a lot of ways. So we usually eat them as more of a side or inside of a stir fry during the winter time. We did 2 types of peas. One is our usual sugar snap peas and the other is Beauregard snow peas. And the Beauregard snow peas, those were new for us this year, but I planted a lot of them because I had this huge bag and I wanted to use it up. So that was kind of a mistake on my part because when it came time to harvest and preserve these, I was really wishing that we had more of our sugar snap peas instead of these snow peas, because really that is our preference, and I was just enamored by the seed packet and the color of these. So that was a good lesson to remember. That's something that I wish I could say it's the first time I've ever done that, but I have definitely done that before. Sometimes you pick things based on color and how good they look, but when it comes down to actual flavor, they're not as good. So that is kind of where I landed with those snow peas this year. I probably won't plant them again next year, and we'll just do the snap peas instead.
We have finished up the first couple of steps with these snap peas. They've been boiled, they went in the ice water bath. I spread them on a tray and flash froze them. So the reason I'm flash freezing them is to be able to keep them into individual pieces when they are frozen. So when you take it out of the freezer, it is not this big block of peas, which is a little bit more difficult to use than just having individual peas that are frozen ready to go. So that's the reason behind it. You can totally skip the flash freezing step if you wanted to, if you knew that you were going to use just 1 pound packages every single time you were to eat your peas. I like to be able to have a little bit more flexibility when I'm using them, so I do flash freeze them and I take that extra step. So now I'm going to vacuum seal these, label them, and stick them in the freezer. Before I vacuum seal these, I always wipe off the top of these bags with a cloth so that it's nice and dry up here. Otherwise, they don't seal that good, even if you have it on the moist setting. And then the other thing I do is if I see liquids start to come up the top of this, I hit the seal button before it is able to get to the top. So you have to be like kind of fast about it. And I used to just like wait there and have it do its automatic cycle, but sometimes if it does that, it will just suck so much air out of the bag that you'll also get all that moisture and then it won't seal. It took me a really long time to learn that. I don't know why. I have to label these really fast because they are starting to thaw, which means they're going to turn into a big brick, just like I didn't want them to. When we first started to do a lot of seasonal from scratch foods, it was a little bit of a learning curve for me to figure out how to take those foods that were coming out of the garden and make them into meals, because I couldn't just pick up a recipe book and follow a recipe, because usually there were a whole bunch of ingredients that I didn't have in the garden. So over time I have developed some of our own like family favorites and recipes for when we have certain things in season. And when we have some of our cool season crops, especially lettuce, one of the things that I love to make is bulgogi lettuce wraps. Cameron introduced me to bulgogi. This is a Korean dish and it is so good. He said when he was there they used to eat it a lot in lettuce wraps. So today I am going to be making that for dinner because we have some lettuce and we have the rice and the meat, and usually that's about all I put in it, but today we also have some carrots, we have garlic scapes, and we have the snap and snow peas. So I'm going to be cooking those up as well, just because we have so many fresh vegetables right now that would go well into that dish. To make these bulgogi lettuce wraps, what I need to do is slice up the meat really thin and then let it marinate for at least an hour, but it's morning, so I'm gonna let it marinate for a couple of hours because the longer you let it go, the better it gets. Within reason, of course. You want to cap it at like 24 hours or so. So I want to make sure it has a good long time to sit in that marinade. To cook all of the meat and the veggies, we are using a Made In carbon steel wok. Thank you, Made In, for sponsoring this video. Made In designs professional quality products for the home cook. Their kitchenware is used in multiple 3 Michelin star restaurants, and they also are used in over 2,000 top quality restaurants across the US, and they have over 100,000 5-star reviews. Another thing that I love about Made In is they partner with artisans to make these products. Made In's award-winning carbon steel frying pans and this wok are made in France and Sweden by the best artisans and family-owned factories that have been producing carbon steel since the 18th century. One of the reasons that I choose to use carbon steel pans is because it is a great hybrid of a cast iron pan and a stainless steel frying pan. So it heats up quickly, it's light enough to move around on the stovetop, and it gives you great heat control. Another reason why I love the carbon steel is because it has a natural, non-toxic, non-stick surface. You season it with oil the same way you would season a cast iron pan. Even though I think cast iron is great, carbon steel is superior for cooking because it holds heat so well, it's more responsive and distributes heat more evenly than cast iron. I have been so impressed with how high quality and easy to use Made In's carbon steel frying pans are, and I highly recommend them. You can check out the carbon steel collection and Made In's other cookware by using the link down in the video description to save on your order.
So here's the meal all finished. We just add some sesame seeds on top of the bulgogi. We have the lettuce, carrots, the snap peas and snow peas, and then finally some rice that we use as well. Next time, I think I would mix in the veggies with the sauce for the bulgogi, but other than that, they were really good, and we top them with a little bit of kimchi. It is a great meal to use up all of those fresh seasonal spring vegetables that we have.
We've got garlic scapes that are ready for harvesting today, so I'm gonna finish the rest of the harvest. I picked a bunch of these last week, and I take off this top part because this stuff is really tough and not very good. And then I'm gonna freeze dry the scapes into powder. We did that last year and I really liked it. The garlic is actually really close to being ready for harvest, if not ready like today, but I need to get these scapes off first. The garlic scapes I picked last week were perfect. The ones that I'm getting this week, I can tell I've waited a little bit too long on some of these. Some are still kind of at the right point, but when you wait a little bit too long, the scapes get tougher, and so they're not as tasty to eat. They are still edible, and since we're making these into a powder, it's not a big deal, but I just wanted to point that out, that they are a little over mature. The best time is right as they come up and start to get like a couple inches on the top. That's the perfect time to pick a garlic scape. Last night, Cam and the kids, they prepped these garlic scapes for me. They clipped off the tips and got them all ready. We stuck them in the freezer, so that we could stick everything into the freeze dryer already frozen, because you have to have it all the same way. So they clipped these, and then I found another bag of these buried deep down in the freezer, so we're going to freeze dry those as well. And then as I was searching, I also found some green onions that I want to freeze dry, so I have 5 bags of those. Last year I freeze dried red onions, the bulbs, and also my yellow too, but the red is what I turned into powder, and it was delicious. So I'm thinking the green onions will probably be the same. You can use any type of onion and it's still going to have that really good onion flavor when you turn it into powder. So we're going to test that out right now. I'm so glad that we now have the extra large freeze dryer so that we can fit all of this in one batch. Before I got started with this, I showed the bags to Cam and I was like, do you think these will all fit on our medium-sized trays? And he was like, no, you need the extra large. And now that it's all laid out, I'm seeing, yes, we definitely needed the extra large trays for this. Another thing I wanted to mention really quick is that I am combining 2 different things here in one freeze dryer batch, the garlic scapes and the green onions, but because they're kind of the same flavor profile, they're going to be fine together. You wouldn't want to combine like green onions and strawberries, for example, because that onion flavor would really infuse into the strawberries, and you don't want that. When you're freeze drying 2 different things together, you want to make sure that they're going to dry in kind of the same amount of time. So you wouldn't want to combine like green onions with chicken broth because they are way different drying times.
One of the things I learned last year when I made onion powder is it rehydrates really easily. And if it does rehydrate, it cakes up in the jar into kind of a big clump. I had that thought in the back of my mind as I took out these freeze-dried onions that I needed to make sure they were exposed to air for as little as possible. So I put them inside the blender, blended them, and then immediately stuck them in the jar and closed it up. I was planning on vacuum sealing these jars, but just for the sake of going quickly, I just put the lid on and I closed it, and then I moved to the next jar and I got all of the jars done first, and then I went back and vacuum sealed each one. Another thought that occurred to me after I had filled up all the jars and made all of the garlic scape powder and the onion scape powder is that a pint-sized jar was probably a little bit too big, and if I were to put it into smaller sized jars, then they would be less likely to rehydrate and get cakey. From our experience, the garlic scape powder doesn't clump up very easily. It doesn't rehydrate as easily as the onion powder does. So I was a little less worried about that, but even so, we moved everything into the half pint sized jars before we vacuum sealed them.
No, I mean with us.
Yeah, exactly. They didn't
Okay.
say. I put 2 lids on this,
Cool.
and then it's sealed.
2 lids.
Yeah.
Huh.
I remember reading that somewhere. If these like little vacuum sealers
Yeah.
don't work, you put 2 of these lids on, and then it seals. I was a little bit late in planting my shelling peas this year, so they are under some heat stress. They're looking like they're getting brown. That's from the heat. The other thing that I did differently that's making them more exposed and stressed is usually I have my shelling peas and my snap peas that I'm growing right next to each other, and the snap peas grow really tall and they'll shade my shelling peas for a good portion of the day. And when I planted them like this, just in their own row, they did not get that shade. and I didn't even think about that, but it's having a negative effect on these plants. I don't really think that they needed the trellis, but what I could have done better is planted them like right behind my asparagus, which is tall, or I could have planted more rows of these shelling peas. I just did the 2 rows, and I could have planted like 6 rows across and gotten a better yield for one, and the other thing is that mass would have helped keep them cooler. And with just the 2 rows that I had, they are not doing so good with our heat. So I actually may do a little experimental batch in the fall. I've never grown the shelling peas in the fall before, but I think they may do better just because it gets hot here really fast and they just start to burn up by the time I'm harvesting. So I went inside and I got some reinforcements. My big kids are all out here helping to pick snap peas and snow peas while I finish up picking the shelling peas, because of course everything's ready all at once. Good job. We just finished harvesting the last of our snap peas and snow peas. With our first harvest, we froze those, and with this batch, we are going to ferment them. I'm going to add some carrots to this, some onions and garlic, and then of course the snap and the snow peas, and then salt and any other thing that I think of. I am just experimenting with this, so we're going to see if it turns out and if it's something that we actually like.
I was not going off a recipe for this ferment. I was just kind of making it up based on what we had in the garden. So in the beginning, I made sure that I weighed everything that I have, because when you're fermenting, you want to make sure you have the right amount of salt to the right amount of vegetables to be able to get it to ferment properly. I started out by chopping up the carrots on the mandolin, but that was taking way too long. So I ended up just using my food processor. Then I started to use the food processor for the snow peas, and it ended up slicing the snow peas a little bit too small. So then I went back and I hand chopped up all the snow peas, and I also am using some of the bulbs from our Egyptian walking onions for this. After those were chopped up, I minced up some garlic to put in, and I just kept thinking the whole time that this ferment would be so much better if I had ginger available. But I have the ginger in the garden, but it's just not ready yet. I dug down there a little bit to see, and it wasn't even close. So I didn't use any ginger in this, but I think that would have made it a whole bunch better. We are huge kimchi fans in this house, so I figured I couldn't go wrong by adding some gochugaru powder. This is the Korean pepper powder, and it's a little bit spicy, a little bit sweet, and I just added a little bit because I didn't want it to be too spicy. I was really hoping that the vegetables would have enough liquid in them that I wouldn't need to add any extra brine. But unfortunately, that did not happen. I let the carrots and the peas sit in salt for about 12 hours. And even after all that time, they had just not released enough liquid. So I mixed up a brine. When I do a brine, I usually do 1 cup of salt to 1 gallon of water. And I knew I didn't need a full gallon of this. So I'm adding a 1/4 cup of salt into a quart jar. I put weights on the top, and then I filled the jars with the brine the rest of the way, and I covered it with the fermentation lids. I let this ferment for about 5 days, and that was the sweet spot. It was perfect at that point. I had my kids taste test it after it was done, and I was very surprised because they actually all said that they liked it, and they ate half the jar in one sitting. I tried it out and I didn't love it as much as I love kimchi, so I decided I probably wouldn't make this again. I am planning on experimenting a lot more with fermentation this summer, so hopefully we can land on a couple recipes that we love.